Very nice to see you all here. My name's Kathleen Rogers. I'm president of Earth Day Network. Earth Day Network is the organization that came out of the first Earth Day. We are year-round in spite of our name, and we're now in 192 countries with about 1 billion, maybe and a quarter people participating in Earth Day worldwide, which sort of runs from January to May at this point. We're located in Washington, but we also have a very active and growing office in India with offices in Calcutta and now in Delhi. And we have been partners with Terry for some time, and I'm now, among some of you others in the room, are also on the board of Terry North America, which I'm very proud to be. And Earth Day Network also runs a campaign called Women in the Green Economy. It has the great acronym of WAGE, although it is not focused so much on women's wages or parity in the economy as much as it is focused on leadership. Earth Day Network, and I think everyone in this room, along with all of our panelists, believe that the green technology revolution is upon us and will change us all for better or for worse in the coming decades. And we want women at the table. And I see so many women I've met with at meetings on the global treaties and on other environmental and climate issues, where oftentimes it's been them and me, a small group of women in a room with 1,000 guys. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that if you're dating, but I'm married. So I think one of the important things is that women have a seat at the table, be fully engaged in everything we do. And we also believe that without women leaders, it will be very difficult to pull all of the women leaders at the bottom up. As my husband says when he walks into a room full of women, he has two choices: to agree or not say anything. And so we really believe in the whole idea, and he better not, by the way, but we have a really strong feeling that there needs to be critical mass of women at this critical time as we develop a global green economy and as we move from one source of energy to multiple sources of energy. And I think this is no more critical. We've put trillions of dollars into issues at the bottom, but unless women are there with their hands out to pull us up, to pull and sponsor and mentor, it'll be very difficult for us really to promote women's leadership. For many of us, the idea of unlimited green energy actually feel that it's a bad idea, that we don't want to create a world where we have the power to convert and change and power anything we want or to develop any way we want. So we really believe that women bring special virtues, including great investors, long-term strategic thinkers, and very, very open to working cooperatively with each other. And some of the characteristics of women that women have, men obviously share, but we do believe we all need to be there, again, not for parity's sake or equity's sake alone, but because we think our voices are strategic and different and tactically different as well, and so we all need to be at the table. I'm hoping my colleagues agree. So with that, I'm going to, and we can talk about my program, but we have 3 amazing experts with us today, both in academia and government, and we are really looking forward to their work. They're all different and bring enormous talents and experience to the table on the issue of women in the green economy. So let me introduce them. We're going to start with Rashinda, who many of you know, but I'll give you a couple of minutes on her bio, which is so impressive. Rashinda Van Leeuwen is the Executive Director of Energy and Climate and the Energy Access Initiative at the UN Foundation. She oversees their work on energy access and joined the UN Foundation in 2010 from Good Energies, a global renewable energy investment company. She is an expert and speaker on energy access and poverty issues. She has over 20 years of executive management experience with the UN, private sector, and other positions on many continents. So, Rashinda, thank you. Oh, sorry, one microphone.
How would you like me just to make a couple of introduction?
Yeah, I think what we'll do is all the panelists will take a few minutes, at least longer than I did, and just tell us about your work. We have some questions that I'll be asking them, but I think they can hear me.
Okay, I think we can all hear. So
Why don't you all speak, and then we'll go to some of the questions and then open it to the floor.
So I'll just kick off with a couple of remarks about the work I do and sort of how it relates to women and green economy. And thank you very much for the introduction, Kathleen. My career has been nothing if not eclectic. At the United Nations Foundation, and the reason I'm sitting here is that we are very much active in the UN-led Sustainable Energy for All initiative, which is focusing on 3 global objectives to achieve by 2030 in the broad context of sustainable development, but sustainable development in a carbon-constrained world. And they are looking at achieving universal energy access, both in terms of electrification, basic electrification, and also access to clean cooking solutions and fuels for the 1.3 billion people around the world who don't have access to electricity, and the something like 2.8 billion people who don't have access to improved cooking solutions. We're also working on 2 other global objectives in terms of increasing global energy efficiency and also doubling the rate of renewable energy around the world by 2030. This Sustainable Energy for All initiative is not explicitly having a gender element as such, but I want to really contextualize it from a gender standpoint, just to explain why our role and our contribution as women and as men supporting women leaders is so incredibly important. Within the context of Sustainable Energy for All at UN Foundation, I founded and lead a network of something like 1,200 companies, predominantly companies and also nonprofit organizations and international institutions, specifically focusing on addressing this energy access issue from the electrification standpoint. Of these 1,200 companies that have joined us that are delivering an array of energy services, 159 of them are located in India. India still has, as a single country, the largest single population that has no access to electricity. It's a women's issue, it's a men's issue, it's a family issue, it's a household issue, it's a community issue. That said, coming out of private equity, where, like Kathleen, I would be sitting in a room in a conference like this, and with sometimes 300 men and me, private equity definitely is an area where I think a woman's perspective, and globally a woman's voice can be heard much more strongly. But in terms of the leadership, also within the Energy Access Practitioner Network, one of the things that I see is still a dearth of women CEOs of these energy companies. Even, and I have to say this, and I hesitate to say this, even in those companies where their customer base is explicitly geared towards women customers. And I will say that again, even in that context. And again, I'm sorry to say it, but not even do they not have women's leadership, although I'm on the board of a terrific social enterprise in India called Selco, where the president of that company is now actually a woman. It was founded by Harish Hande. He has turned over the reins to a very, very able woman who's now leading that company. That said, boards of directors, again, many of these companies are explicitly focusing on delivering a commercial service, but doing it in a way that also has a social good. The boards of these companies, for the most part, again with Selco as a notable exception, still don't have many women serving on their boards. And I ask you, in today's society, if you're designing, we all get now the need to design with your customer in mind. But that goes all the way through the supply chain. So you need to also invest with your customer in mind. You need to manufacture with your customer in mind. And if you're not really including women's leadership all of the way, ultimately, as a company, you're going to fail because you're not really going to understand what it is that your customers need and want. So I'm putting that out there, again, really coming from the standpoint of delivering energy solutions. And women who are often the energy providers for their families in India, in other parts of the world, cannot be neglected in being part of the solution all the way from the design through the delivery. I'm delighted that Seema Paul is in the audience today as well. Seema works with Climate Works and was until very recently based in India as the head of Shakti, and Shakti is one of our partners at the UN Foundation, also working in the context of India at looking at how we can help to catalyze further delivery of energy services, but within that specifically looking at the energy, the women's context as well. The last piece I want to say quickly before Kathleen goes to the other panelists is we're also coming at this from a broader standpoint of looking in the Sustainable Energy for All initiative at the intersection not only of delivering energy sustainably, but also looking at other aspects of sustainable development. And we recently launched another piece of the initiative that's explicitly focusing on the nexus of energy access and how it can provide better health outcomes, particularly for women, for communities as a whole, but particularly for women. And looking at the World Health Organization has recognized that there is a huge critical infrastructure hole when it comes to electrification of health clinics in rural areas. And particularly this has a negative impact on women during childbirth. And so in terms of energy access, we also need to think of it as well as the opportunity to reduce maternal mortality and newborn mortality as well. And so we have launched recently within Sustainable Energy for All a new piece of the initiative that is specifically focusing on helping to develop the infrastructure for rural healthcare services that can enable particularly better outcomes for women, not only in India, but clearly India still, although there's terrific work going on by Terry, by many others in terms of bringing energy access services to remote communities, there's still a long way to go. We need to be looking at it really from a holistic standpoint of better development outcomes, and I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Rajenda. So our next panelist, who I just met for the first time, but have read some of the, or read about some of the work she's done, is also a great addition to this panel, Carolyn Macgregor. She is with the Department of Energy. She's a policy analyst in the Office of Policy and International Affairs. She works in two areas at the Department of Energy, although she does a lot more, I've noticed by looking at her work online in particular. She is one of the leaders in the clean energy ministerials, and also is focused on C3E, who many of you know is a clean energy and empowerment initiative that was launched at one of the clean energy ministerials in 2010. And she also runs the Global Lighting and Energy Access Partnership, and I think you'll be talking about both of those efforts. Oh, okay.
All right, well, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. I think I'll say just a few words about our C3E program, and then leave more time for some discussion. But our starting point with C3E, so clean energy, education, and empowerment. It's a bit of a mouthful, but there it is. It was launched at our first Clean Energy Ministerial, as Kathleen said, back in 2010, largely with the leadership of Christina Johnson, who was then our Undersecretary of Energy. It is broad in mandate. It is, its goal is to advance women in clean energy. And 9 governments signed on at that time, again, to this concept. Our challenge after that was to put some meat on the bones, like, okay, great, how? So we convened a very, very productive workshop. We brought in 20 or 30 women working in clean energy and asked them, what are the barriers, and how can we overcome the barriers? And what we got out of that workshop was that women need role models, that women need visibility, and that women need a peer-to-peer network. And so with that, we created a 3-part C3E program here in the United States. So it's delivering on this U.S. commitment to this ministerial initiative. We have ambassadors. These are women who are at the senior level in the clean energy field. They are role models. They are advocates. They're spokespeople for clean energy, really. We have 30 of them. We're very proud of them. Richenda is among them. We also have 3 men, because it's not just, women for women. Men have an important role to play in this as well. Secondly, we have an awards program for mid-career leadership and achievement. There are 6 categories. MIT's Energy Initiative put $10,000 prizes behind each one of them. We gave out our first awards last fall, and the nominations for the second year are still open until midnight tomorrow. So I encourage all of you to go to c3eawards.org and nominate an outstanding woman you know. I'm sure everyone in this room can think of several. And then last but not least, the peer-to-peer networking piece is an annual symposium. MIT hosted the last one last September. Minister Peters from South Africa gave a fantastic keynote address. We're having another symposium this September. Hundreds of people in the room, probably 90% were women, and the observation was, and Kathleen mentioned something similar, it was about the inverse of what you'd expect at a traditional energy industry conference. So I think everyone there commented on the unique value in that. At our last ministerial, so last month, it was the 4th ministerial hosted by the Indian government. We had an excellent panel on C3E and the role of women in clean energy. At that time, we launched a networking platform, which we're quite excited about. It's an online community called c3enet.org. I encourage everyone to check that out. And maybe I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our final panelist, Dr. Loretta Moore, has such an impressive resume. I almost feel like reading it all to you, but in the interest of time, I'll just give you some highlights. At the moment, she serves as the Associate Vice President for Research and Scholarly Engagement and is also a professor of computer science at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. Her portfolio is long and incredibly accomplished. She's also the principal investigator on a grant from the National Science Foundation's Advance program, which is aimed to advance the careers of female faculty in STEM disciplines as well as in social and behavioral sciences. She has held positions at Auburn University, AT&T Bell Labs, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, Army Research Lab, NASA Kennedy Space Center, NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, and a number of other distinguished and impressive organizations. She has published numerous articles and reports and presented more than 100 presentations on her research and education and strategies for organizations that hope to enhance diversity in the STEM workforce. Doctor?
Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. I would like to thank Dr. Annapurna, Susan, and everyone and Kathleen for inviting me to this panel. I'm from the academic side, so we tend to be somewhat wild, so I'll try to be reserved and calm. But as Associate Vice President, I'm responsible for advancing the careers of faculty members individually, but also in promoting transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and international collaborations between faculty members at JSU and globally. In my second role as Principal Investigator for the JSU Advance program, I'm responsible for advancing the careers of female faculty in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics disciplines and transforming the climate. The Advance program is funded through the National Science Foundation's Advance program, and the goal of that program is advancing women in the STEM disciplines and also transforming the institutional climate. We have a recent grant from the National Science Foundation. Initially, the program is about 10 years old. Initially, the program was aimed at what we call, quote, fixing the women. And after so many millions of dollars and so many grants to individuals, it was clearly realized that fixing the women was not the only problem. that there also had to be a emphasis on fixing, I won't say fixing the men because we have some male champions here, but fixing the institutional climate and the organizational culture in order to promote the advancement of women. So here today, given all things being equal between all the men and all the women, I know we have some great women here in the area of energy, what is needed to promote leadership among women within the green economy? As a computer scientist, we can talk about cybersecurity, but that's not my area. And most of my work recently has been in what are the strategies that are necessary. In the U.S., we have what we call the shrinking pipeline. About third or fourth grade female students are very excited about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics and perform quite well. But as you go up to high school and you go to college and you go to the master's level and the PhD level, the faculty ranks, and all the way up through presidents of organizations, you have this shrinking pipeline, and we're almost non-existent at those topmost peers. So this program looks at the area of faculty members, because if we increase faculty and make them more powerful, then we will see that effect among the students within the organization. So if we look at some of the issues that are faced by women faculty, they have teaching and advising workloads that are much higher than their male colleagues. Students come to them as mom or auntie or sister. I've had students say, well, give me a hug. I was like, no, you don't ask your male faculty members for hugs. With no hugging here. You know, we're professor students. So they expect more from female faculty than they do their male colleagues. So female faculty spend a lot of time nurturing and caring for the students. We look at these informal networks and mentoring that help men advance. They tell them the roads, they play golf, they tell them what they need to do. Because there's so few women in these environments, you don't have that same level of informal mentoring and networking. And of course, there are men who work with women, but you have fewer choices of people who will work with you and guide your career. We have family and child care responsibilities that most male faculty members don't bear the burden of. And so for many women, especially women of color or women from some other areas, they bear the brunt of those responsibilities, but are still expected to perform at the same level. We have a chilly climate, so even if things are all going right, if you're in an environment where it appears that you're unwelcome or that there are issues, that affects your ability to really excel. And then there are policies that hinder the advancement of women. I'm sitting next to the policy lady, which is great, because if you look at academics, you have this 5 to 7 year period in which you must be tenured and promoted, or you lose your job. And so for women faculty members finishing the PhD, if they've put off childbearing, at that point it's time. But what do you do about this 5 to 7 year? Because that's typically inflexible. So the advanced program and its policies have really worked with institutions on how do you vary this policy. And it's amazing that most institutions didn't see it as a hindrance. So many females with PhD would choose not to enter tenure track because they needed flexibility in order to have a family and raise a family. So many challenges that women face in these disciplines, and the advanced program seeks to solve those challenges. So with the JSU program, we're looking at those challenges for women of color, and particularly at HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions. So we have many components, and I won't tell you about all of them, but we have one that's a summer writing retreats where we take people into the woods during the summer, and we, say your cell phone's not going to work, and we want you to focus on your writing and your scholarly engagement, getting those proposals, getting those articles out. We have another program that promotes international visibility. We have one for informal mentoring and networking, for leadership, for bias awareness, so that men and women are aware of implicit biases that they hold. We have a policy component as well, and it's set within a social science setting so that you can look at the changes and what has happened. With the international visibility component, in the U.S., women faculty in STEM tend not to be engaged in international partnerships or collaborations. So that's one of the unique aspects of the Jackson State University program. I had spent 3 weeks in India prior to this program, and I was a little nervous about going. I hadn't gone. And so one of my colleagues said, do ask the women. And I was like, well, do as the women. Which women? You know, who do I follow? What do I do? They say, if you're in doubt, just do as the women. And I just found such a sisterhood among the women of India, such strength and beauty that I was like, this is a great place to return. So during the first year of the grant, we set out to set up collaborations between women, female faculty from STEM at JSU and women in India, and we traveled to 4 cities. We presented at 7 institutions our research in terms of looking for individuals to collaborate with. And last December, we followed up by participating in the Indo-US Forum on Women in Science, which was great in Delhi in December. Last year we went to South Africa to establish partnerships with women in South Africa, and we're teaching some joint courses because we're catering to students with similar needs. And this year we're traveling to South America. So as a part of this conference, we hope to extend those relationships, those international partnerships between women in India and women within the U.S.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take a couple of seconds. I know our whole opportunity here has been shortened by the last event sort of running over, but I did want to, we had hoped to have also a corporate representative, but we have Jeff Seabright, who's just as good. And so I want Jeff, I've known Jeff a long time, and I think I only see him in other countries, but I'm happy to be here with him. And he has a short video, and I'm not sure if it's teed up, and also wanted to take a couple minutes just to talk about Coca-Cola's great program. And I'm going to let him describe it. Should we run the video first, or do you want to?
Maybe while they get it set up, I can just, because I think you're going to have to use a microphone because the speakers don't work, so I'll stand up. So we have something at Coca, just mentioned Kathleen before, the Women's Leadership Council, which is really women leaders in the Coca-Cola company, the C-suite and other parts of the business, looking to advance women within the Coca-Cola company. But they also identified an opportunity to set a very ambitious goal, which our CEO immediately agreed to empower 5 million women by 2020 in our value chain. Right? So it's a big lift. 5 million women is a big number. We have about 10 million women, as far as we know today, in our value chain, in retail, in agriculture, in recycling, and a whole host of functions. And so we've launched this. We're about 400,000 into it. Charlotte Rose out of the UK leads the effort. And a lot of it is focused on sort of women in the green economy. One of the things we're doing in India is working with Jane Irrigation, represented here at this conference, on training 100,000 smallholder farmers in mango production with a dedicated focus on empowering women in that process. We've created a training institute, Parivartan, which is a training skills institute for retail. Again, very heavy focus through the 5x20 initiative on women's empowerment. And then lastly, and a very cool thing, which is a little video I'll show, and hopefully it's not too commercial, but it's about our 5x20 initiative. And we've launched solar coolers, so off-grid applications, no electricity. How do you get cold drink equipment in those places? And then also how do you begin to leverage that for other applications like cell phone charging and lantern charging? And we've taken some of those learnings from India, and we're now exporting them to sub-Saharan Africa, where this is taking off. We're going to soon make some additional announcements around taking this. So with that, let me just run the video and bring a little bit of visual color to the video.
Do we have to push a button back there to get it going?
Yeah, it's a marathon. Oh, wait, go.
जब ये मेरी दुकान खुली, मेरे जीवन का सबसे महत्वपूर्ण पल था। ये दुकान शुरू करने के लिए हमें बहुत तकलीफ उठानी पड़ी, जैसे रिश्तेदारों से ब्याज पे पैसे लिए और थोड़ी बहुत जो चीज़ थी वो गहने रखी, बैंक से पैसा उठाया और तभी जाके ये दुकान खरीद सकता हूँ। हाँ, कोका कोला का मुझ पर मतलब हमारे यहाँ बहुत बड़ा योगदान है। सोलर कूलर से हमें ये फ़ायदा हुआ है कि जैसे ये चार्जर लगा है, इससे मोबाइल चार्ज करते हैं, ग्राहक आते हैं और मोबाइल चार्ज करते हैं। और ये लालटेन है, इसको हम दिन में चार्ज कर लेते हैं इसी से, और रात में जैसे लाइट चली जाती है तो इसको जला लेते हैं। हाँ ऐसा होता है, जैसे वहाँ पे अंधेरा है तो लोग यहाँ रोशनी देख के यहाँ चले आते हैं। आमदनी में बहुत फ़र्क पड़ा है, जैसे पहले कमाते थे 200 रुपये तो 60-70 रुपये इसकी वजह से रोज़ कमा लेते हैं। और मैं जैसे दुकान चला रही हूँ अपने हस्बैंड के साथ, मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगता है और मतलब घर में मेरी इज्जत भी बढ़ी है और मुझे अच्छा लगता है कि और मुझे ऐसा भी लगता है जैसे बच्चे और मतलब अच्छे स्कूल में पढ़ें और उनका नाम ऊंचा हो, कुछ बने, तो ये सब कुछ बहुत अच्छा लगता है मुझे।
Thanks. So I'm not really sure, does anybody know how long we actually have? It's 11:54, and we have to be at lunch at, okay, so I'm going to sort of try and go through some of these questions, and all the panelists and everyone in the audience can contribute. You don't have to answer every question. I think what we've heard about important things we sort of focused on are barriers to advancement and participation, the qualities that women leaders would bring and the critical importance of that, and then sort of the urgency of getting our global act together on climate, environment issues, and sustainable development. And so out of sort of those concerns, we've developed some questions, and some of them are part of our Women in the Green Economy campaign, but many of them really address issues that our panelists and you in the audience have expertise on. The first question is pretty general, but and we don't all have to answer this, and we can do it shortly and then move on. But what is the potential for women to contribute to the design and development of a green economy? What is it that you all, as panelists and members of the audience, see as our main avenues for participation and the urgency of that? Rashinda?
I think I can just say massive and we can move on.
I was going to say 100%, or rather 50%, and I'll just acknowledge Phyllis Yoshida, who's out here in the audience. I was brainstorming with her yesterday because she's been deeply involved in Indo-US, women's dialogues over the years, and she was like, "Oh, that's easy, 100%."
I think the potential is huge, especially if you look at the changing demographics and the number of women who make up the workforce now. So we must do things to encourage them in areas such as the green economy and in STEM so that they're prepared to take on a leadership role as the population shifts.
That's great. And does anybody in the audience want to contribute? Because I think it's a small enough room that you can hear. So if you have anything specific to say on any of these questions, you can raise your hand and I'll just let you talk, because I think it's really important to hear from you all. I think the next question is, the next two questions really relate to India, and I'm going to combine them. The first is, what are the challenges to women's leadership in each country? And I don't think we have anyone, well, maybe you would be able to contribute. Seema, if you have something to say, it'd be really useful. And feel free to come up here or just speak from there. And how can the U.S. and India foster greater involvement in women in leading sustainable economic growth? So that's a question both for all of the panelists as well as anybody who is a specialist in India.
Well, I think it would be great to hear from Seema, having served as the leader of Shakti in India for the last couple of years. But I'll take a crack at it in terms of the area where I focus, which is predominantly looking at leadership in terms of the business world. And again, that my comments reflect the many discussions that I have both within the context of my work with Selco, but also from members of our practitioner network. I think one of the challenges remains particularly in terms of women as entrepreneurs. Often there are, and again, I'm talking, I think, probably more from the India context today, there are challenges when women who have a good idea, and I'm not even going to go the STEM route because I think that's better answered by others, but who have an idea around starting their business, the challenges even before they enter the bank in terms of access to capital. There is less access to startup capital. There are fewer angel networks specifically that open the door to women. If you come from a family that has connections, that has a strong economic background, perhaps it's slightly easier. But I would say entrepreneurship for women, still the barrier particularly is access to capital. And then I would say that there are still cultural constraints as well for many women. When I first started working in India 13 years ago, at that time I was leading a nonprofit organization out of the US, and I worked with a network of about 50 NGOs in India. And many of them, because we had a very strong focus on women's economic empowerment, many of them, in fact, had women as the top levels of management, but almost all of them had a male CEO. And I recall asking at the time, and my hope is, Seema, that you can say this has changed very much over the intervening period. But one of the reasons that I was told why these women's organizations still had a male CEO was they said it was difficult for women to travel across country by themselves, depending at that time, as they were very heavily on the rail system, and that it wasn't safe for a woman to travel by herself overnight. So there are logistical challenges, and so it was easier for the man to be the head of the organization because they would be the one who would be invited to conferences, and it was easier because they could travel. So I'm very interested to sort of dig through this more, but from an entrepreneur standpoint, there are changes underway. There are some new funds that have been capitalized recently, specifically focusing on helping to empower women entrepreneurs, but I think we still have a way to go, and particularly in this energy space and also the clean energy space.
Well, I'll just say that we need more women at the top. Change can come top down or bottom up, and you need it from all sides. But I think something that we can observe in our country is that there's not necessarily an awareness among everyone that there needs to be more gender diversity, and organizations benefit from that gender diversity. I think there are a lot of people who would look at the top management of DOE and think it looks like a perfectly normal, fine ministry. It is 99% men. And that's changing with my generation. I think at the mid-level, you do see a lot of women in the halls of DOE, but it's just certainly not at the top. And, there are a lot of reasons for it. Loretta mentioned several. We all have biases, but none of us think that we do. There was a really interesting op-ed that I'll mention, written by Sylvia Ann Hewlett, which might be a name that some of you recognize, but it was in the New York Times recently. It said, "Mentors are good, but sponsors are better." You need the very senior people who go to bat for you, and the truth is that people tend to go to bat for people they implicitly trust. Well, when the very, very senior people are men, they instinctively are just more likely to trust people who look like them, who are young men. That's not all the time. Sheryl Sandberg certainly benefited from Larry Summers' sponsorship, right? But that's the shift that you need. And I think we will see that change, over time. Revolutions, at least in this regard, probably don't happen overnight, but maybe we all need to be doing more to really quantify the benefits of that gender diversity. I think a McKinsey study recently showed that companies that had at least 3 of 15 senior executives, so what is that, 20%, who were women, performed better on a range of metrics than companies that had 0 women. And I think we can discuss, there's an interesting nuance around, there are several pioneering women, the single woman who makes it to the top, but not everyone is cut out to be a pioneer. In terms of retention, it helps to have a peer network, and so I think you get better outcomes once it's not just a token woman or 2, but once you get 3 or 4 out of 10, things really shift, and you see those benefits.
I agree with my panelists, and one thing I wanted to bring up, there have been a number of studies in the U.S. that look at characteristics of good leaders. And when you look at those characteristics, people equate them with masculine characteristics. So when women have those characteristics, they're seen as being masculine. Well, you're really leading like a man. You're very masculine. So they're seen negative for women, but positive for men. So some women may be discouraged because they don't see, or their peers look at them as being more masculine if they're a good leader. So I think changing the way people view leaders, and we have to get more women in those topmost positions so that they can see that these characteristics are of good leaders. They're not necessarily masculine or feminine. And of course, women do bring different things to the table, so teaching people how to embrace those, to embrace diversity. I think, as we were saying, having a community of leaders, so you're not all alone with those labels being applied to you, but you have a community of other individuals who understand and can support you. We talked about the ability to travel. So how do we look at group travel? That's one thing that we're looking at my institutions. Women would feel uncomfortable going to some countries alone. So if you can find a group of similar individuals, then you can travel one another. But then looking back at the characteristics and how do we change the biases and the opinions, not only of men, but also of our female colleagues, so that they respect women who are at the top levels, for who they are.
Can we convince you to come up here? Oh, great, thank you.
So I'll just speak from here for ease.
If it's working, sure.
So just a couple of comments from my India perspective. I'm going to comment on the topic. I'm not sure I'm specifically responding to your questions. I think these are two big challenges in India. First, to convince that the green economy is real, it is big enough, that there will be growth in the green economy, and that the whole paradigm of economy and growth should shift to a green economy. That's a huge challenge in India. It's business as usual mentality by and large. We are just beginning at the margins to make a difference. And then there is a second challenge, which is around women, right? The empowerment of women, and you've all been reading the newspapers and the rape of, women, etc., which is an old issue, but fortunately people are now becoming more aware and raising their voices. And then when you club these two issues that are very hard issues, I'm just wondering, where is the intervention point in India? So one thought that I have is, how about bringing the two communities together? We have the community of people working on green economy, and we have a very strong community of feminist leaders, women, people working on women's empowerment issues, reproductive rights, and much more. They are working separate, on separate tracks. I think one specific measure that could strengthen both the communities would be to promote dialogue and enable the two communities to speak about each other's perspectives. So that's a small contribution I wanted to make to your topic here.
That's actually really useful. Part of what the Women in the Green Economy campaign does is holds consultations around the world. And that's exactly probably what we didn't do in India, is we brought corporate and government leaders together to talk about the green economy. And one of the issues we immediately ran into was, well, two that you flagged. One is how to define it, how to discuss it, what are the opportunities, and then also, because women's empowerment at the local and grassroots level is so critical to development in general, that I think it was a missed opportunity for us not to bring everybody together to do that. The next question, and thank you very much, that was really helpful. The next question sort of goes back to a few things we've mentioned, but I think it's also really important. The question before I turn it over is, what steps can we all take or propose to ensure full participation and retention of girls and young women in STEM education? And I have a really interesting example from the Ambassador of the United States from Finland, is quite enlightened and comes from a country that has legislated women's equality in the workforce since 1920. So they have actually almost 100 years of legislation and regulation that allows women to move in and out of the marketplace in a way it's pretty inspirational. And that, coupled with the fact that Finland leads the world in science, engineering, technology, and math off and on almost every research piece that you finds Finland at the top or leading it. And those two things combined are really interesting. But the third fact, I think, that's useful for this, and if you look at the trajectory of Finland, they now have more girls in STEM education through the academic, through college and university than men. And they actually described it as having difficulty in Finland attracting men into STEM careers. So they have actually moved through a trajectory that's completely unheard of in the United States and in some other countries. And it would be worth, trying to figure out what it is beyond just Finland's characteristics culturally, and to try and figure out what promotes that. But I'd be really interested to hear from you all how we can track them through STEM and through their academic careers, and then finally into sponsorship throughout their careers. It's kind of combining a number of the questions. And that's right up your alley, of course, but.
I think one thing we need to do is make sure that we educate women about the opportunities in the STEM fields and what it involves. In the U.S., I know some women are not attracted to the hard sciences because they want to do something that helps or enables people. So many people are attracted to biology, to becoming medical doctors. So I think if they could see the impact that they could have in any of these disciplines, on a global level, that they would be really excited. I think another thing is to provide positive role models. I think the more people that we see that are like us, that are doing exciting things, we can see ourselves in similar positions. So through PR campaigns and through other ways that we can really see women in those roles. And I think even in the U.S., we tend not to see women. If we look at cybersecurity, we see a certain characteristics of males with glasses that look like geeks. So when a young female sees that image of a cybersecurity specialist, except for the young lady on CSI, they tend to say, well, I don't think computer science is for me. I don't want to look like that and become a computer scientist. So that image that we portray to young people, I think, has a lasting impact.
Okay, that's great.
I was just going to say, I completely agree on role models, and that's, again, precisely where our ambassadors came from, and, we could, of course, always do more to really get them out there. Last year, we put together a small book, I suppose, of their career stories written in the first person. It was a marvelous book, and we handed it out at the symposium. It's still available online through the ministerial website. If anyone's interested, I can send you the direct URL. But I think it's helpful to see that there's not one direct path, especially given that clean energy is so cross-disciplinary. It's not, there's not a single linear, study chemistry, and, be a chemist. There are lots of ways in. STEM is a very, very strong feeder. But finance is an important piece, the regulatory environment, the legal aspects, and then the policy and advocacy bits. The communication of, why do we need clean energy in the first place? And that's something that, women are gifted in explaining, communicating things. There are, a few other small things I would note. I remember last fall, the 3 winners of the Google Science Fair were young girls. But then again, the Science Bowl winners this year were all teams of young boys. So I do think, as you were describing, there's a big shift needed. And then my last comment is on the need for this from a competitiveness point of view, and I think that's where you see the White House get involved. The STEM gap is substantial, so not just in the disciplines, and women don't study engineering as much as men do, but even the women who do graduate with higher STEM degrees don't necessarily go work in STEM fields. So women make up half of the nation's workforce, or almost half. It's about 48%, but they only have 24% of STEM jobs. Those who do have STEM jobs make 33% more than their non-STEM counterparts. So, there's a wage gap reason. It's better for families, and I think that's something you've seen, again, the White House get behind in the last year. But it comes back to the founding premise of C3E, and how we will not get as far as fast if we're not leveraging the talent of all members of our societies.
I'd just like to add, it is something that's global. We ran a workshop in Cambodia a couple of months ago, and one of the participants was a renewable energy engineer, a woman from Vietnam, and she was just gushing. She said, it's just so wonderful, you know, that there are other women here, because in Vietnam I just feel very much still like a minority among minorities, sort of in my own country in this field. So I really commend Caroline and DOE for what they've done through the Clean Energy Ministerial with the C3E network, and that we've got a South African affiliate, and that there's work going on and underway already in India. But I do really encourage you to look at their platform, because we're very much hoping that it can be a sort of more of a global platform, because we're hearing that it's women around the world recognizing basically, you know, that there are others out there, and sort of in their own particular geographical or sectoral context, you know, that there's that support, you know, that there is that sort of global mentorship and sponsorship that we're looking for. And the two other things, very quick points I'd make. First of all, I think there is a generational shift, you know, and I think we have to recognize that, embrace that, and I'd like to see that embraced more in the media. You know, as Caroline says, you know, it's what youth are doing. It's seeing those shifts are underway. You know, we have a lot of very contradictory sort of forces. You know, we have Anne-Marie Slaughter, Why Women Can't Have It All. You know, then we have Lean In, and then we have sort of all of these different influences. And as a woman, you know, I tend to shut down and just ignore them all and just get on with doing what I'm doing. But you know, I think for young women in particular, they're hearing an awful lot of contradictory kind of, you can do it, you can't do it, you may be able to do it, how can you do it, where can you do it? And I think really championing through the media some of the just amazing young women in the STEM fields, but more broadly, you know, in other areas as well, working on issues related to a green economy would be one way to help.
Thank you. So the last question, and then we want to take questions from the audience, is what are the prescriptions for change? I mean, we have Earth Day Network has a couple of ideas, and we've been holding these panels, as I said, around the world, and are doing more. But one of them on the academic side, and it's one we're pushing in the Clinton Global Initiative Forum and a number of other things, is my feeling. I'm not an academic, but I have an academic who specializes in this. And my feeling is, why are we giving our best and brightest women from our top universities to Fortune 500 companies that don't prove to those women or to the universities that are feeding them into it that they will be sponsored, mentored all the way through? So one of our prescriptions is, and ideas, is to get lots of different organizations and associations working on women's issues and the top university leaders together to get them to draw up some, probably voluntary, but more important, I think, some accounting for how they treat women once they enter into their companies. And two is creating some sort of scorecard where you can really understand what the prognosis and likelihood that a woman would move through the system. So an agreement, I don't care if it's Caltech Poly or University of California, Davis, or Indiana University, or Loretta's College, a university in Jackson. I think the important thing is, if we're sending women into from academic excellence into great companies, big and small, that we need to have the data that women can look at to see how women will progress, and then actually create MOUs between Fortune 500 and everybody else and our best institutions. That's one of our prescriptions. Another thing I think is, and I'd love to hear what everyone thinks, are some sort of US and global version of what's going on in the EU particularly, but also other countries, around mandating women's participation at the board level and other places. So those are, Earth Day Network hasn't come up with a particular prescription. It's happening in the EU without us. I don't know how Wall Street would feel, but I'd like to hear from everybody in the room what the ideas. And many of them, really when we were in India doing the consultations, once you took out, and when we do the consultations around the world, regardless of the country or continents, when you take out the cultural issues away from it and just look at the ideas that they had, they're almost universally applied across the board, regardless of the region or country or culture or religion. So it's pretty interesting how when you take out those elements, you're finding certain things, and one of them tends to move towards some sort of recognition that we need to mandate or improve the situation so that we do have parity inequality in both media, corporations, government, and NGOs. I mean, even in my own world, it's largely run by men. So I'd love to hear from everyone, but I'll let everybody else come up with some ideas for policy and other types of agendas. Oh, yeah, should we do this first and then, or why don't you go ahead? Do you have a microphone or?
Can everybody hear?
Yeah.
Sensei Raj from the Sustainable Network. I want to piggyback on what you said, Kathleen, is are we feeding women into the system, the corporate system, which gobbles them up? Forgetting about the green economy. Let's get to the green economy a little bit later. But first of all, is the gender equality, because that's a major question in building a planet or a system that we have totally forgotten to away from. So, reverting back to the question, are we feeding women back into the system of the corporates, which feeds into their own egotistical business purpose, of course, but beyond that, what purpose would it serve as against thinking about what social reconstruction could women bring about, and what other initiatives could women bring about being in those positions, or if not creating their own, rather than just being in the corporate. I know Jeff is giving me such a hard stare that I can possibly have. But the primary question is, what is it that would lead towards building a green economy with women in the forefront, or going hand in hand with the men? That's my primary question.
I mean, just from a basic standpoint, if you're coming at it looking at a consumer, I don't know what Coke's demographics are in terms of how many men versus how many women drink Coke, but I imagine there's probably pretty much gender parity in terms of their customer base. So you would think that when your customer base has 50% men, 50% women, you probably want to have that reflected in your corporate structure as well. You know, I think women's participation in the economy, generally speaking, around the world, you can extrapolate beyond Coke to the financial sector. You know, here in the US, there's been a lot of litigation around ensuring, you know, appropriate inclusion. I'm not sure to what extent India has really used litigation to enable, you know, the breaking of glass ceilings. But it's not really a question. I think I would frame the question just diametrically opposite to how you're framing it, which is, why on earth wouldn't you include them? You know, why on earth wouldn't women be part of the solution? We're 50% of the world, and I think just, you know, why wouldn't you engage with women to help be part of the solution for some pretty horrendous challenges that we're facing as a world? And just on that note, just I think one of the interesting things about our previous Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, I mean, one of the things that she was recognized for in terms of her practice of diplomacy, and to what extent that was due to her as an individual and to what extent it was due to her as a woman reflecting women, but it was a very different approach to foreign policy. And I do see that we do have women's leadership now in a number of different areas. I think if Christiana Figueres as the UNFCCC, you know, we're trying to fix some pretty darn big issues that the world is facing. As corporates, you know, we need to do business differently. You know, it's no longer enough just to say sort of CSR. You have to look at sustainability throughout your whole supply chain, throughout your whole structure as an institution. And women, you know, I think it goes without saying that we have a lot to offer in being part of the solution.
Did anybody want to comment on that? And then we'll go back to the audience.
All right. Well, I would just add that I know there's a lot of competition for the top talent. Companies compete very hard to get at the very small pool of highly qualified women in STEM fields. But I do like your idea of, you know, kind of tracking it over time, and, you know, whether it looks like an MOU or a voluntary commitment of some sort. I think that could be really positive. We've heard that from some of our ambassadors. We've heard it from some of our working groups. On the question of mandates, I know that some countries have used that very effectively. I'm not really in a position to comment on whether that would work in the US or not. You know, that doesn't tend to be our approach to things. We tend to make it market-oriented. But I think transparency is a good place to start. You know, maybe very leading companies in this could step forward and say, you know, they'll report against a baseline every year, and over time you get a time series of how where women have gone. I think that could be very positive.
I definitely agree with Kathleen. I think within an organization, we need to have clear measures of accountability to ensure a diverse workforce, and accountability in terms of the recruitment of women and other minority or underrepresented groups within an organization, the retention of them, so a lot of them get lost and fall out of the system, and also the advancement. Just because they're retained at the lower ranks of an organization, they have to be advanced. And this has to be a part of the manager's annual evaluation to ensure that these things are happening, and they must be as important as many other things within an organization. I think the report card is great. We're working on a report card for academic institutions, and we won't necessarily publicize those that are bad, but we would definitely bring attention to those that are great models. If 50% of your client base is women, how do women fare at the lower ranks within your organization, but also at the topmost ranks? So doing something similar, and we talked to Kathleen about that, for other types of corporations and organizations to really look at your customer base and look at how you're promoting these groups within your organization.
I'm Kathleen Rogers with Chance and Water, and I did the mommy track for 22 years. I stayed home, and now I run a multi-million-dollar company. But in terms of prescription for how to make change, I would say empower women to ask others for help. Teach them, make that a part of it. The reason I'm privileged to be here is because of Kathleen Rogers. I reached out to him, I asked for help, and found out about this yesterday. I'm here today, and from California. And literally, I reached out as I'm stepping up from a CFO, COO position into a CEO position to go to men and say, I don't know what I need to do at this level. Can you give me an hour and help me? And people have been very generous in doing that. And recently, I've been privileged of meeting women that are the $300 million range, and they're willing to take some time if you ask, but educate me. And I don't know how that would translate into, other than another article or something, but I mean to really create some sort of policies or programs that actually educate girls or everybody to ask for help so that we can get it out to everybody around the world who's in a position to ask. Sorry, yeah, sure.
To piggyback on what Ms. Ruiz said just now, the power to ask comes from creating an ambience wherein you're embracing an inclusive approach, starting from the family itself, because you asked for prescription. How do you build a green economy? Around the planet, let me take India as an example. That was one of the questions what somebody in the panel asked us. In particular context with India, what has been done? Let's go back to say about 4 decades. Women did not have a voice as to even ask what is the share that they can with the family, and they could go to the court. You could basically take the approach of litigative approach in getting their equal rights and share in the family, which was unheard of even 4 decades back. So that's a major leap in terms of having a voice right in the family itself. And I believe the family being the integral unit to build a society, that is where it should start. To build upon what you said is, the power to ask comes from the family itself, number one. The dignity of the woman itself is respected and acknowledged. Now let's take it in the context of the society. What are we doing in terms of empowering them? I think India has got major programs in running entrepreneurship empowerment at the micro-unit level, and also at the smaller SME sector as well. Now, we can use the same practices, scale it up, build it up, translate it everywhere else. But the focus has been in the gender equality and also empowerment in terms of feeding them to the corporate sector, whereas the corporate sector contributes to less than 20% of the entire world. Now, why is it that we are not focusing on the remaining 80% wherein what thrives the economy of any particular context, be it US, be it anywhere else, be it a small country in Africa called Botswana, possibly. The same principles hold true. So why are we not focusing on the 80% of that where we build the economy by means of small and medium-sized enterprises, by encouraging them to take the route of the entrepreneur? So the education plus the support, the mentoring, plus making available of the resources, wouldn't that lead to the empowering of the women to contribute to the green economy? Isn't that what we should be focusing on, is my question. Rather than talk about it.
Sina, do you have any comments? I think really what he was sort of describing is in India, in order to get to the heart of the matter, which is how we empower women and what would some of the issues be. I think a couple of them. One is in India, it would be incredibly important to build some sort of family education so that women, if I understood him right, so that women would be feel empowered within their families to move up as they're from young girls to move out in society. And so he's prescribing education for families in India. But also I think he's suggesting, if I understood him correctly, is that you would have to look at both small and medium enterprises in order to introduce the concept of equality and feed women into that process as well. Make that sort of right.
Yeah, I agree with the second point about medium and small enterprises being a very important and significant part of India's, employment market. So we cannot just focus on the big corporates, but I think that the big corporates may be a place to start because they tend to be more organized and they can set an example. And many of these corporates are also multinationals like Coca-Cola and Walmarts of the world. And because they've done these things in other geographies, it's possible for them to translate it into the Indian context faster, from there to the bigger multinationals that are India's own, and then on to the, you cannot ignore the small and medium enterprises. I totally agree. I don't have a comment on your point about the family. I just don't know where to start. There's so many families. Where is the intervention point? That depends on each family's own culture. I think that the school is an important entry point, but school education in India leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, I think if the school as a hub for community interface strengthens in India, then it is possible to reach out to families along the lines of things that are being done in the US. But other than that, yes, I agree the family culture matters. I don't know where to change it. You have to change it one person at a time, and that's a very long process. So you have to look for some very strategic entry points, and I think in the beginning, big corporates are an important one. I don't know what the government does itself. I mean, there isn't a great deal that the government is doing to promote women in positions of power within the government. I mean, there is a bill in Parliament that 1/3 of the members should become women, and it has not passed Parliament, although progress is being made. So I think some energy can be put there, but holding the government itself accountable in terms of the number of bureaucratic high-level, secretary-level slots that women get in the Indian government, I think that would be a good point of focus.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more comment, and then we have to go to lunch. We'll have two people, one in the back, and then do you want to go? I think we need to turn down the volume a little bit, or something went wrong there.
Just to add what's being said, some of the feedback we received from Jackson State for women faculty in the science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines is that if we could make their spouses and their family understand what it means to be a woman, that would be a great benefit to them. And so we held a special workshop called The Academic Woman, Balancing Responsibility, Expectations, and Biases. And we brought all of the spouses to the table, and we told them that we wanted their help in making their wives or partners more successful. And what we really wanted to do was make them aware of cultural biases that they held about what their wife should be doing. And in doing so, bringing that group of that support network together, women reported a greater ease at home because the spouse had a better understanding of what it meant to be a woman in this discipline where they're underrepresented. So starting those dialogues, not just with biases of colleagues, but with biases that may be held by family members to help them understand.
Thank you. So Rashinda wanted to say something.
I just have a very small comment on that. One of the things that Selco has been doing, Selco is based in Bangalore, it's a solar company, it's installed more than 150,000 solar home systems around India over its 17 years in existence. It's the largest solar provider focusing on off-grid in India. And it's also very much looking at its own track record in terms of the embracing of women. And I've mentioned a woman is now leading Selco as its president, although we're still figuring on leadership sort of in other parts of Selco. But one of the things that it did in terms of its profit distribution this last year was focus, rather than giving the president a big bonus, they looked at women and their respective roles within Selco and found that, in fact, the lowest rungs on the Selco ladder of employment were almost universally held by women. And talking about their families and some of the areas where they struggle, in India, in April, you also have to pay your school fees for your kids for the next year. And apparently that's a huge point of tension in a lot of families because you're scrambling to actually try and pull the fees together to be able to pay them. So what they did was that they did an inverted bonus system this last year, which came out in April, specifically focusing on the lowest salaried levels within Selco and giving an extra 10% bonus to those people, because 10% at the top doesn't mean a whole lot when you're already making a good salary. 10% at the bottom made the difference for these women, basically for some of them in not getting into conflict in the context of their families at home, because they were really being seen to be able to contribute to the family for paying the school fees for the coming year. So just to think about it in the corporate setting, about some of your policies, your remuneration strategies, and how that has a social effect that not only works in terms of your women employees, but also their families in a broader context too.
Did you have a question?
Moderator, I'm an accidental walk-in into this room, but as I was watching all these various panels, some of them have just 3 people sitting around a table, and some of the others I didn't find very interesting, and I thought, look, this is a big room, there are more people here, but more than anything else, in my opinion, it's discussing what I believe is one of the most fundamental issues of making the world a better place. I represent the government of India at the United Nations. And I was sitting with my colleague here, and he mentioned something very interesting. He said just a few weeks back, one of these large gatherings on women's issues called the Commission on the Status of Women met in New York. And he said that he found himself in an odd minority, being one of the few men in the room. Well, that was the case for 2 weeks, till we came to the last day when the conclusions were to be adopted. And then, believe me, there were only guys like me around. I think we did adopt good progressive conclusions. I'm sorry I'm digressing. Yeah, we did, because, it's particularly important that this cannot be a movement all by yourself in your own isolation. Neither it can be women for women, nor can it be men for women. It can't be. There has to be an intersection, and the intersection has to be the largest. But I just want to make one very basic and big point. How are we going to make the world a better place? How are we going to grow the economy? Forget a green economy. Forget that. How are we going to grow the economy if 50% of that part of the population remains not fully charged, not fully empowered? It's in the interest of everyone, men included, and of course women included, that you should get them into the mainstream, get them going. I'm sure they bring values, they bring their own DNA into the equation. All of that will help. Somebody mentioned about the corporate sector. Look, India, like the United States, has a very large number of these success stories. If we can count an Indian lady who studied in India and heading one of the Fortune 500 companies in the United States, well, yes, Pepsi-Cola. But one of the major partners of this summit here is the Indian Chamber of Commerce. It's called the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce Industry. It's headed by a lady. And she's not one of those who descended from, her father owned the company and she was the only child and she got it. No, not because of that. She's a professional, and she heads HSBC in India, mind you, and sits on their global board. So we have lots of stories, as does the United States. But we need to do more than that. We've broken that barrier of the odd, good lady making it to the top. We need to break the barrier, and we need to, for this, do something in the area of laws, legal empowerment, etc., because it helps. And I'm going to stop by giving you one example. Nearly 20 years back, we enacted legislation to ensure that 33% of all local municipalities and village local government institutions, there were women elected. Most of the men laughed and said, oh, damn good. Now my wife, my daughter-in-law, my sister, etc. will sit there. They will sit in the room. I will tell them, you know, this is the decision you should take. It was great. It went on like this for 4 or 5 years. The second time around when they got elected, those women told them, yeah, just sit outside. Yeah, thank you very much for the advice. Now we are going inside. The third time around, they told them, you just remain at your own place. Carry on doing your own bit. We'll take the decisions. It matters. Who takes decisions matter. And that is why women's empowerment in institutional manner is extremely important. It sets example. It gets things going. And I dare say it's for the betterment of all of us. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to say this. But I really want to commend you all, because you are focusing what I believe is on the most important element of what we can do here for sustainable development, green economy, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great ending. Thank you all, and we'll see you up at lunch. Really appreciate you coming.